In June 2018, President Trump announced at a National Space Council meeting that the United States would be developing a Space Force and officially directed the Department of Defense to begin work on it immediately.
Very importantly, I'm hereby directing the Department of Defense and Pentagon to immediately begin the process necessary to establish a Space Force as the sixth branch of the armed forces.
The proposal was less out of this world and more out of left field. In fact, DoD officials had no idea that the president was going to issue that directive. The president has been flippantly issuing things that looked like orders in the past, so it was possible that this was simply going to be just a one-off idea. But then, in August of 2018, Vice President Mike Pence delivered an address to the Pentagon where he redoubled the administration's commitment to creating the Space Force.
7 weeks ago, President Trump directed the Department of Defense to immediately begin the process necessary to establish a Space Force as the sixth branch of the armed forces. Today, the Department of Defense will release a report outlining the first stages of our administration's plan to implement the President's guidance and turn his vision into a reality.
It appears that the administration is, in fact, very keen on making the Space Force a reality. Now, I grew up a stone's throw away from NASA, and I've spent the better part of a decade playing Halo. So I'll be honest and say that on first blush, this seemed like a pretty enticing idea to a geek like me. But the public writ large is split as to whether or not we should have an entirely new branch dedicated to space. 38% of the public agrees with the idea, while 42% disagree with it. Although that apparent closeness betrays how polarized the topic is, which is unsurprising considering the source of it. Only 18% of Democrats agree with the idea, while 64% disagree, a pattern that's almost perfectly flipped amongst Republicans. But this wouldn't be the first time that a president strove to accomplish something absent of popular support. So today, we're going to talk about what it would take to make the president's pronouncement a reality. Today, we're going to talk about what it takes to make a Space Force. It may come as a surprise to some that President Trump even has to do all that much. The president is the commander-in-chief of the armed forces as per the Constitution, after all. As I discussed in the Where is Pot Really Legal video, the Constitution's emphasis on shared powers means that there's actually a lot of overlap with regards to constitutional prerogatives. And in this case, while the president has the power to command the armed forces, Congress has the power to create said armed forces. Indeed, every branch of the military in existence today is here because Congress deigned it. Congress officially established the Army in 1789, the Navy and the Marine Corps in 1794, the Coast Guard in 1915, and the Air Force in 1947. The most plausible route for the creation of the Space Force would probably mirror the way that the Air Force came into existence. At its earliest inception, arguably as far back as the Civil War, the mission of the Air Force was subsumed under that of the Army, although the Navy also saw it as an extension of its own prerogatives as well. The then Air Corps' disparate missions were consolidated throughout the 1930s, with the Army gaining routine control in all instances unless it pertained to activity over the sea. It also gained the current name of Air Force during that time. And that is the way that it largely stayed up until the National Security Act of 1947, where decades of strain from within the Air Force for independence was finally actualized. Since the Air Force actually has a dedicated space component, Congress could conceivably cleave it off and make it its own branch, just as they did with the Air Force in 1947. The legislative route for the Space Force has actually been tried before. In fact, it was just attempted in 2017. In June of 2017, the House Armed Services Committee proposed creating a U.S. Space Corps to be administered by the Air Force, much the same way that the Marine Corps is administered by the U.S. Navy. However, that idea was resisted by the DoD, the Air Force, and the U.S. Strategic Command, and a whole cadre of individuals ranging from Secretary of Defense James Mattis to former commander of the Air Force Space Command, General Victor Ronard Jr. In fact, Senators Tom Cotton and Bill Nelson introduced an amendment that was adopted unanimously by the rest of the Senate, prohibiting the creation of a Space Force within the bill that the Armed Services Committee tried to attach the original proposal to, effectively grounding the idea. However, the 2018 version of that bill does authorize the reestablishment of the U.S. Space Command, which had existed between 1985 through 2002 before it was incorporated into the United States Strategic Command. Congress also commissioned reports to look at the need and feasibility of a U.S. Space Force. The first report of that investigation is due in August of 2018, and the second in December of that same year. But there's another way to get a Space Force. Kinda. It involves having all the functional parts of a Space Force up and running while waiting for Congress's official blessing. While congressional approval is necessary to make the Space Force into a bona fide sixth branch of the armed services, it is possible for the executive to set up all the elements and then have them functioning beforehand so that all Congress has to do is consolidate them formally. And indeed, that's exactly what the DoD is planning to do. In a memo released to the public and to congressional defense committees, the DoD describes the steps that it is taking to follow the president's directive. Establishing the Space Force will be multidimensional and phased. In this first phase, using existing authorities, the Department of Defense will establish several of the component parts of the Space Force. The second phase requires Congress to combine these components into the sixth branch of the Armed Forces. The Department of Defense is immediately pursuing 4 components. These components are the Space Development Agency, Space Operations Force, Services and Support, and Space Command. This sort of step is only possible because the United States military has already been actively involved in just about every element of space for decades. It even had combat-ready forces in the Navy, Army, and Air Force that could be called upon if the need arose. But think more drones on remote operations and less space battles, unfortunately. What these actions are doing is effectively trying to centralize all the disparate activities under the purview of one joint command, the aforementioned U.S. Space Command. In that way, the different branches still retain their own assets and expertise regarding space, but there is intended to be increased cooperation among them in the future, with the DoD submitting a proposal to Congress to unify them all in the 2020 budget cycle. So it turns out that the easiest way to make a Space Force may just be to basically have one already and hope that Congress just agrees to consolidate everything under one department and service. Interestingly, a lot of these moves mirrors the kind of actions that happened in the 1930s with the Air Force, so it's definitely possible that a Space Force will be created by Congress, for history to repeat itself. But this possibility was stymied by perhaps one major discordance between now and when the Air Force came into its own. There was not only significant public support in its creation, but also significant support amongst those serving in or administering over the Air Force, and that, for now, with regards to the Space Force, seems to be lacking. But with that said, if the Pentagon manages to succeed in all their tasks by 2020, the ball would be in Congress's court, and they've definitely managed to surprise people over its history. So just because the odds are low, it doesn't make them zero. I'm curious to see what you guys think about the Space Force, the creation of different armed services, anything else that cropped up while watching this video, or suggestions for future topics. I'm more than happy for those down in the comments section below. I'm looking forward to reading all of them and answering a few of them in next week's office hours. Last week we talked about the Janus case and what it means for public sector unions in the United States. So let's talk about some of the talking about that y'all did after I was done talking about it. Bobby Murmur, the guy who inspired this video, chimed in with the correction on a comment that I made in the video. I said that those not in a union may not have much recourse without directly supporting the union, and that could be problematic if they happen to agree with the kinds of actions being taken. And he corrected me in explaining that non-members can lobby to have the union decertified, which would then be settled by a majority vote. I sincerely appreciate the correction, but it's actually on that kind of point where I'm still feeling a little bit iffy on some things. I'm not exactly comfortable with union exclusivity being indefinite until the workers opt out. I think that sort of system can lead to the kinds of corruptions that many non-union activists point to when they try to make their case. If exclusivity were to be maintained, I personally prefer it to be done through continued affirmation by the workers in the shop. So something like an election done every 5 years or something like that. Again, just my opinion, but that kind of raises something that I kind of was also feeling kind of about. This Infinitus and Gab9509112 had an exchange in the comments looking at the price of union dues, how expensive are they, and why they are expensive as they are. I highly recommend checking that out. I think you're getting a pretty good look at where people are coming from here about unions more generally, not just with regards to Janus. Also, Helios Infinitus made a couple of claims about the effects that membership might have on growth and employment that ring true enough to me to merit additional investigation. So I'm going to do some digging over the next week or so and see what I can find out on those fronts. I'll probably respond with a comment with those findings in the original comment chain. I also appreciate the support from Duran Sapiens, Jace the Deck Builder, and Gamaniel, but not Bobby in his second comment. And the same because that triggered a real-life conversation and debate about OLS as a regression technique, its merits and its detriments. That it may be a weird hill for me to die on, but here's where I'm planting my flag. Alright, and on that ridiculous note, that's all the time that we have for today. Thank you guys so much for your comments. I'm looking forward to doing this all again next time. Thanks for everything as always down in the doobie-doo, as well as links to Facebook, Twitter, and blog. Look forward to seeing you guys out there as well. If you enjoyed this video, I hope you consider giving it a thumbs up. If you want to support the channel, you can do so by commenting down below, by sharing this video, by subscribing to the channel, stay in the loop for more awesome social science content is uploaded. If you want to be guaranteed to be in the loop when I upload a new video, be sure to click the bell icon as well. As always, thank you guys so much for watching. I'll see you next time.